G'day and welcome to another edition of the Aussie Ideas Man. I decided to make a video because what the heck, there are about 60 videos in the last 2 days since CES opened up. So what's one more? We at least want one that you can believe. So here I am. I've decided to concentrate on a few occasions where Aunt Tony has taken up the mic again and rattled off the snake oil that he's so used to spewing. The main one comes from a video by David the Inspector. So I'll take the usual method, and that is to watch along and make comments as I can quickly make them off the cuff, and then go back and add text strips or boxes to fill in things I think I've missed that should be important enough to go in. It's my usual format. People should be used to it by now. So here we go. Off and running.
Hey APTERA fans, this is David the Inspector. Here just a moment ago we had a bit of an interview here with CTNS, so let's take a look.
So let's kind of like move to the next page to let Chris give short kind of welcoming speech at the same time, give some IR to you guys so that you can understand and learn more about the APTERA motors. He's going to give speeches at the same time, deliver the pitch.
Don't give Steve the mic.
Round of applause.
Whatever you do.
Annyeonghaseyo. Welcome to CES and welcome to the world's first solar mobility. This is the first vehicle that actually produces its own fuel.
That to me is an outright lie. The world's first vehicle that actually produces its own fuel. I am certain there are quite a few light year zeros getting around still. They stopped producing them 2 years ago. And of course, if you go to the Quad Solar stand, you'll see another one from the Netherlands. And you might even be able to buy one while you're there. You got Buckley's chance of getting one of these. It's far from the world's first.
There's never been anything like it.
Yes, there has. There's been a lot like it. In particular, the APTERA that went broke in 2011. It was a lot like it. Didn't have the solar, but in every other way it was a lot like it. And there was that other car, and it's a video you should watch. I think it was called the Dale. Watched it a couple of days ago. I'll put the URL in this one.
Its focus on efficiency means that it gets about 350 miles per gallon equivalent.
That is not proven. Let's hope that they can meet their next deadline of in a couple of weeks, proving what efficiency it actually gets.
When we started the company, Steve had an idea for how do you make the most efficient thing possible. And when you look across the transportation landscape, you notice that SUVs and sedans today can use up to 70% of their fuel at highway speeds, just pushing air out of the way.
I find it ironic that he says 70% of fuel is used to push air out of the way, because it's actually doing something. If it's used to push air out of the way, well and good. You need to do that to get from A to B. Yet he puts solar panels on a car, on a silly trike, that more than 70% of the sunlight goes to waste, does nothing. So which is worse? Putting 70% fuel in an ICE car and it pushes air out of the way for you? Or putting solar panels on that let 70% of the power from the sun just go to waste? What it actually does is that 70% heats your cabin like there's no tomorrow.
So if you can make those vehicles much more aerodynamic, you'd instantly get 60% better fuel economy. So this vehicle starts with aerodynamics. That's why it has such a unique shape. We get extreme efficiency. We use about a quarter of the energy per mile as the average EV.
Once again, there is no proof that they use a quarter of the average EV per mile. These are figures that are completely unsubstantiated. He's had almost 5 years now to prove these things and has never bothered to. He thinks that if the computer says so, it must be right, but we just don't know. Still, pretty soon there's that testing that has to be done, and I hope it's independent testing. I don't trust his company, anyone within cui of that company, to test accurately and to report honestly.
That means we can use a quarter of the battery pack to go the same distance. With just a 40 kilowatt hour battery pack, we can go 400 miles of range.
A 40 watt hour battery pack is not a quarter of the average EV's battery pack. The average EV battery pack is not 160 watt hours. I would say the average battery pack in an EV, and we're talking about cars here, which need to be larger, is roughly 50. And he's got 40 in a silly trike, a two-seater trike that is less than a car. Why doesn't he compare the average battery pack in a bicycle, an e-bike? And you can see how bloated it really is.
Because it's such a small battery pack too, that means we can have a very cost-effective transportation solution for people. This vehicle, as it sits, with 400 miles of range, with full 700 watts of solar, with front-wheel drive, only costs $40,000. That's in a landscape where the average EV today costs $60,000, and the average American is paying about $50,000 for combustion vehicles. The fuel cost that you can save with this vehicle over 10 years is also pretty immense. If you're switching from a petroleum-powered vehicle over to a vehicle like the APTERA, you can save $2,000 to $3,000 a year sometimes in fuel costs. So it's amazing to be here at CES.
All of these are extremely rubbery figures. It is not right to promote a product on unsubstantiated figures. Yet this snake oil salesman does it all the time, and has consistently done it for nearly 5 years.
We had really scheduled these builds for March, but because we wanted to be at this show, the engineering team really hustled up and made it happen to have these pretty vehicles at the show. This vehicle right here is an aesthetic.
Aesthetic. I am very suspicious now that he calls it aesthetic because it doesn't have any propellant in it. No motor. This thing here, they haven't lifted the hood because, well, it might have nothing under it. And if they've done that, once again, they've come to a show like Gamma, like the Alphas, with the fake prototype. That's all you can call it. You cannot call that production intent. Who's going to buy a production EV with no motor in it? Who's going to buy something aesthetic only?
Demonstrator of what the interior and exterior will look like. But just down the street here, we have a test driving vehicle where we're taking media out on test drives. The other day, we drove 25 miles in that vehicle giving test drives. Amazing test drives. Everybody loves the feel, the acceleration, the cool factor of being out in a solar-powered spaceship. But interestingly enough, we took 25 miles out of the pack. We put 29 miles back into the pack with our solar power.
Now this one has to be investigated. First of all, how many hours did they take test driving people around? From what I can gather, they would take one person per half hour. 2 rides per hour, maybe 16 rides in the day, if it's an 8-hour day. 16 rides. So if they've taken 16 rides and gone 25 miles, they've gone well under 2 miles per ride. And they have sat in the sun for 8 hours of the day to get 29 miles of solar. Now, I question that they got 29 miles because from what everything I have seen on people in the car getting test rides, in full sunshine, they're pulling about 260 watts. I used to buy 100-watt light globes when they were incandescent. 260 watts doesn't supply enough power for 3 of my lights. And you can't get 2 people in a car going 25 miles, even if 260 watts was being generated all the time, every second for the whole 8 hours. So when I do the maths, none of this adds up at all. This needs to be investigated. I say this because I have found personally Aunt Tony to be a liar. I have found he lies. And so we had better get real facts, not just claims from Aunt Tony until such time as he's trustworthy, which may never happen. I'll also say that from what little I've watched on test drives, Chris McCannon has said that in that same day that he's talking about, that they fell short of getting sufficient solar from the sun to power the joyrides that they gave out on the day. So there's a contradiction there. These things are on record. Lots of videos about CES, those roughly 60 that you can scroll through. If you search on APTERA and hit the filter last updated, you will get about 60 videos over the last 2 days. In the nearly 4 years that I've been following APTERA, there have been so many contradictory statements. And now between Chris McCannon and Aunt Tony here, they contradict the results of the first day. Well, Chris McCannon says that all the data is being logged, so let them provide the data. There were reasons why I couldn't do a lot of the calculations myself. One is that the screen on the joyriding buggy doesn't seem to have an odometer on it. I didn't get it off the screen. How can you know they did 25 miles on that day when there's no start reading or no end reading? No reading at all. Must be in the Dell computer between the seats because it's not on the driving screen. And what production intent vehicle has no odometer? I think that might even be illegal. Surely it's illegal in Australia. Maybe America is that lax that they let it go, but not here. I think it has to have an odometer to put a registration plate on it, and this thing has a registration plate on the back.
제가 알기로 100마일인데 제가 크리스한테 한번 물어보겠습니다.
102 miles an hour.
Nearly every small car can do 102 miles per hour, but no APTERA prototype has ever gone over 50 miles per hour. And that's not because of the motor, that's because it's a trike, and over 55 miles per hour is just too dangerous, in my opinion. They say they throttle back the motor for testing purposes and other weak excuses, but I say they throttle back the speed because they don't want a rollover. They've also claimed that they've tested whether it will roll over, but I don't believe that. They say they couldn't roll it over, but I don't believe that. And on top of that, from what I've seen, they squeal too much when going at normal pace around corners. The rear tyre loses proper contact with the road surface, so I don't think we need to worry much about rolling it as much as wearing out your back tyre and spinning off the road while staying on its wheels.
Is there any question?
The acceleration is 0 to 60 miles per hour in 4.5 seconds with the front wheel drive.
Now this one I really take issue with. 4.5 seconds with that Elafi motor. Now he's pointing at that one when he says with the front wheel drive, and I don't believe he should point to that one because if it's just aesthetic to the point that there's no motor in it and can't move, then he shouldn't be pointing at it. He should be saying ones with a motor in it, the launch edition, can do whatever his claim is, but as I said before, that needs to be proven. In Australia, it's a crime to make false assertions. It's a crime to state a performance figure that it simply can't meet. And it doesn't matter if it's off a prototype. It doesn't matter that they haven't sold one to anyone. The simple fact of making that false claim is enough for it to be a crime. I would like the American authorities to see that the American people and people who are smitten in the rest of the world are not being deceived.
Yeah, APTERA's had the most successful crowdfunding in history.
I don't believe they have had the most successful crowdfunding in history. I believe I looked it up some months back and there's been at least one other that is way more successful. Once again, I think that's one of the many points that I had caught him out lying.
And we're working with some larger banks in New York to structure an IPO strategy right now.
They have been talking about an IPO strategy since the first day I looked at it nearly 4 years ago. And it's one of those things that's always on the back burner. If they're doing it right now, somebody find out the average time it takes for a company like theirs to structure an IPO and get it done and dusted. And let's see how much longer APTERA is taking. Let's see how long they take it. From what I can tell, it would be worse for people if they did go public with real shares instead of the fakes that they are dealing with at the moment. I think it might be a worse thing, but still, they're all talk so far and no action. Just like the promises of this going into production, which, just to remind people, was promised to be produced mid-2021 and then every year since. And now, as we begin 2025, they're hoping to scrape it in by the end of 25, but you can read into that not even in 2026. Maybe never. Well, that'll do for now. I'll just say I'm giving you my personal opinion to entertain you, and I am not responsible for whatever decision you make with regard to this company. You've been entertained, that's all. It's up to you to decide who has the facts and who might be just worth taking notice of. That's all for me. Bye for now. Stay safe.